Hello and welcome to another video. I recently posted on the blog about my history with anger, and I talked about some of the things that I realized around anger because it was such a big thing. And I'll leave a link to that blog post in the description. But one of the things that really helped me with anger was the teachings of Luang Por Teean. So Luang Por Teean is a monk who lived here in Thailand. He died quite a few years ago. And I came across one of his students, Pra Sumbat, about 18 years ago in Hue Hin. And I was actually initially very resistant to his teachings because he used this kind of hand moving technique, and I've done an earlier video on that hand moving technique, and I grew to love that hand moving technique eventually. But when I initially came across his teachings, it was all outside my comfort zone. It seemed all too alien to me. I associated meditation with sitting down and more. I call that proper meditation, but I was just foolish. But I used to, go see this monk regularly, and I used to turn up. I mean, this is back when I was during my drinking days, and I'd turn up, really hungover, sometimes still drunk, and it was kind of very disrespectful. And I was very resistant to pretty much everything, even though I went, and I was basically an asshole. But looking at Luang Por Teean's story, he could be a bit resistant too, and a bit doing his own thing as well, and I'll kind of go into that in a minute. So what I want to talk about today is Luang Por Teean's approach to anger, because that was a big problem for him. So Luang Por Teean, he was Luang Por, it means it's Thai for respected father. It's just a title they give people. And he became a monk, but initially, when he kind of made his big discoveries, he wasn't a monk. He was a normal person, a family man, and he worked as a trader. But he'd kind of become very interested in Buddhism. Like, he'd been a monk as a young man for a few years, and it kind of stayed with him. And as a lay person, he was still, very much involved with that kind of thing. And one of the things he's involved with is he used to do what they call make merit. Like, he tried to give give things to the temple, support the temple. And in this particular case, he was arranging some kind of festival, some kind of thing that was going to happen. And he did these things. This was his way of developing, the kind of his own soul searching, I suppose. He would do these things. And one of the things that happened, and he still went on meditation retreats, and I think he got into, deep states of meditation. But what happened was he was organizing this festival, and for some reason his wife asked him a question, and he just flew off the handle. He just got really, really angry. And it was kind of, and then he tried to kind of defend his being angry, even though it was obvious to him and everybody else that he was being ridiculous. And it kind of struck him that despite all of his holy work, all of his good work, he still had this real problem to anger. And his wife had said to him something like, looks like you're in hell. And that was the last thing he wanted to be told, given how spiritual he saw himself. So he decided that, once and for all, that what he would do, he'd find a way to manage his anger, or to get to the root of his anger, which is more what he's trying to do. And that's where his technique, like the hand moving meditation, came in. Because what he realized is that he used to use an analogy of a cat and a rat. And here the cat represented awareness, and the rat is like a defilement, like anger or craving or jealousy, any of this kind of stuff. And he kind of realized that it was the job of awareness of the cat to keep the defilement like anger in check, to keep it, to control it. But the problem for most people is their awareness is not strong enough. And it's kind of like having a very tiny kitten trying to, and having this huge rat in your house, and the little kitten just isn't able to do anything. So in order to be able to deal with that rat, you need to develop the awareness. You need to make that little kitten bigger and bigger and bigger until it's big enough to manage the anger or whatever. And so that's what he began to work on. And he also kind of realized that as you develop this awareness not only gives you the ability to kind of tame or control that anger in the sense that you can see it coming and you don't have to go with it, but you can also start to really develop these real deep insights into what's behind it, and in some way to start to remove the root of it. Now personally, I don't believe it's. I don't see the goal is to get rid of anger completely. I don't even know if that's necessarily such a great thing. I think anger in and of itself may not be the issue. It's the losing control of anger. It's because that was my problem, and it's also and I'll probably do future videos on this because anger is such a big issue. So the way I see with anger, the main problem is that we often use anger to replace other emotions. So in the post that I wrote the other day, I gave an example where I was saying that I realized at a young age that it was easier that if I was feeling afraid, I used to have to walk past this graveyard in this very quiet location. I used to be terrified, so I used to run past the graveyard. So what I started to do is make myself angry, and when I made myself angry, I would feel braver. And so I start using anger as a replacement for feeling afraid. And then I did the same I used anger as a replacement for feeling rejected. And so I ended up kind of using anger to replace all of these other emotions. So I wouldn't have to feel them. I would just kind of resort to anger instead. And this was something I kind of started to do unconsciously, and it just became habitual. So the problem really so much it wasn't anger in and of itself, it was the fact that it was replacing other emotions. And again, I think the biggest problem with anger is that we lose control of it. It's like our awareness is not able to handle it, so we just kind of fly off the handle. And this is something I used to do a lot. I was very, very easily triggered when it came to anger. I was never physically violent, but like verbally and snapping at people, I was bad. And I was like that for years and years and years, and it was happening all the time. And that all changed. I mean, I rarely, I experience anger like everybody else, but I never lose control of it, and not in any way that I'm suppressing it. It's just that But I would say every human being will have a limit. I do notice things that when the conditions are a certain way, it kind of makes us more open or more liable to snap. So we kind of say I have to be more careful when it's very, very hot and humid here in Thailand, because it can kind of make me more irritable. And I definitely do still feel irritability. And the difference isn't that for me, isn't that we don't feel these things. It's that, we're no longer reacting to them the same way. It's like our awareness now is so vast or so powerful that these things just come up, and they're very easy to just come and go, and there's no fear. And I used to be, terribly afraid of just what if I really lost my temper? What if I really, really lost it? And I've heard other people say the same. Because that's the scary thing with anger, is that it reaches a tipping point where people are completely out of control. They don't even know what they're doing anymore, and so that always scared me, that possibility. But the thing that combats that is awareness. So how do we develop this awareness that Luang Por Teean was talking about? I mean, the Pali word is sati, this word sati, and that's why he called his meditation technique, the hand moving meditation technique, Mahasati. Maha means great, and sati means mindfulness, so great mindfulness. And you can kind of watch that video to see his technique. It's earlier on. But basically the way you develop your awareness is to practice being aware. It's as simple as that. And you can kind of say all meditation techniques, do that to one degree or the other. And I mean, we can particularly, it can be good to emphasize the awareness, because and in such a way that it brings it into daily life. So what you'll notice anyway, so say if you meditate for 20 minutes, there usually is a spillover of that awareness, is that initially after you meditate, you may find yourself increasingly more aware of what's going on for the next couple of hours. And by that I mean you're more aware of, say, when an anger thought comes up. You're more, you go, oh, I'm getting angry, or oh, that there's something bugging me. So it's like we have this ability, what I mean by awareness is this ability to take a step back from what's going on in our mind. Of course, we call this mindfulness, don't we? We take a step back of what's going on in our mind so we can be more objective about it, and we can notice what's going on. So we can notice that we're getting grumpier. We can notice that our thoughts are getting more judgmental. And by just being more aware of these things, we're less controlled by these things. Instead of being caught up in them, we're just observing them. We're in this kind of observing, this witnessing space. And what the developing the awareness is about is so we can have that more and more. So we can be, and it just becomes kind of more a natural thing. And that was very important for Luang Por Teean. He saw the limitation of just developing deep states of awareness and concentration in meditation. He was very insistent that this was something we needed to have all the time, that we needed to bring into our daily life, because he saw, despite all his meditation retreats and his practice, that he was still losing his temper and still being, really, really childish around his temper. And so the important thing is to bring this into daily life, to practice and to continue practicing during the day, to keep on deliberately being aware in a deliberate way. And, so you could use a hand moving technique, or just start to be aware of our movements. Now, one reason I suggest that people have a regular meditation practice is that it really helps with this. That if we have a meditation practice, say in the morning, we're much more likely to continue doing this throughout the day, and we'll still have that spillover of mindfulness from the meditation session. But also, the more important thing is throughout the day is to keep on grounding ourselves. So, like say if as we're moving around, so just become much more aware of this act of moving. When we're say cooking, to become much more aware of this act of cooking and eating. Just simple things like bringing our attention to the rising and falling of the breath in the tummy. And that focusing on the tummy can be beneficial in so many other ways as well. I did a video on this as well, how focusing on the breath in the tummy can be very comforting. And I think sometimes why we become angry is because we just don't feel comfortable. So not only can you, by focusing on, say, the breath in the tummy, can you be comforting yourself, but you're also at the same time being more mindful because you're aware of what you're doing. See, any time you focus on something, on a body sensation, on movement, on whatever, you have to by default be mindful. And the reason is, see, for you, so say if I say to you, focus on the breath in your tummy, you have to know if your attention is on the breath in the tummy. And you have to know when it's not. So if you drift off and start thinking about something else, you have to notice that that's happened. That's what I mean by being more aware. That's what means you're kind of going into that position of witnessing. And what that means is that when that becomes much more a part of who we are, then when something starts to make us angry. Now, one of the big things as well that I haven't pointed out is often with anger, it's building up and building up and building up and building up, and we don't notice it. And by the time that it finally spills over, it's already too late. We've let it build up. So by being mindful, by being much more aware, you start to become much more aware. Oh, there's irritation here. There's irritation here. And often all it needs, especially when anger is small, is that acknowledgement that it's there for it to start to dissipate. That's all it usually takes. But see, the problem is we're often completely ignoring the fact that we're irritated. And so it just builds up and builds up. So we something happens and we feel a bit irritated. And we just kind of say, oh, that's nothing. But of course we're still irritated. And then somebody says something and we snap at them. And now we're getting a bit, but then we kind of brush that off as well. But again, we've gone up a level. And it's like it builds up and builds up until we explode. And that's because we're completely oblivious to this anger inside. So, by becoming more mindful, first of all, we're becoming much more aware of when it starts as a niggle, and it's much easier to deal with. And all we have to be able to do usually is just acknowledge it. A big thing is when, see the real problem with anger, and this is what happened to me, is when it would explode, when it would become explosive. And it never felt like a choice to me. I would just snap at people. And it never felt like a choice. And I do it, and I deeply regret what I said afterwards. But by then, of course, it's too late. But what started to happen because I built up this mindfulness is there started to be a gap before that happened. Is that I would know, even though this may have been something that built up, I would notice just before I was about to say something that there was a choice. That choice wasn't there before I'd kind of more developed that ability to be aware. It came as a direct result of the awareness. So suddenly I'm about to say something, and it's like now suddenly there's this choice there of that allowed me not to go with the anger, with the outburst of anger. And that made such a huge difference to my life. That was such a major turning point, because there were so many times where I just automatically would just say something, and then there'd be days of sulking and all of that, me sulking and all of that stuff coming afterwards. Because I was just like Luang Por Teean in his example. I wasn't just satisfied with being angry. I tried to justify it afterwards, even though it was completely nonsense usually to try to justify it. Well, it's always nonsense to try and justify it, because as far as I'm concerned, like once we lose our temper, we've lost the argument. And this is something as well, anger itself isn't the problem, it's the losing control. So sometimes, expressing a bit of anger in a controlled way can be useful. So say, with my son, he loves playing video games like most kids, and being on the computer. I could decide to angrily, to show that this is serious and that I want him to stop the computer, especially if he hasn't listened to me asking him 2 or 3 times before. But if I just snap and lose my temper and start shouting at him to stop using the computer, that's different. That's not the same thing. See, one was a tactical decision, and the other was losing control. And it's the latter that's really is the problem. So look, this topic of anger, huge topic. So I'll be coming back to it, and there's a lot more to say. So with Luang Por Teean, he focused more on being aware of it, and that is important. But I found there was other things important as well. So one thing that was very important for me was the self-compassion, and and learning to self-soothe. I was talking about the belly breathing, and I'll come back to that. And also, developing this loving kindness, so that to generally have this more sense of a kind of friendly attitude towards life, hugely important. And to also, as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of the time the reason we get so angry is because we're using it to cover over other emotions. So we have to develop the ability to be with these emotions that we're covering over. And again, that's referred to as self-compassion. And so I hope that was useful. If you'd like to do some coaching with me, you can always contact me below. Please consider subscribing. Please consider giving a like. I mean, it's just so helpful to me. I really want to make this channel useful to you guys. I want to put stuff on here that's useful. And you can help me doing that by asking questions, leaving comments. I really encourage it. And if I'll either answer your question in the comments, or I'll make a video about it. I'm more than happy to do that. And so thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you again.